it is really important to be able to generalize, to follow the spirit of the law, but not the letter of it. And I think it's interesting how a lot of people are able to either be perfectionists or they just don't care. So there's people who want to throw every rule out the window and don't bother at all to even try to follow the rules. They just want to be sloppy and undisciplined in everything they do. And then there's people who have to get it right. And it seems like they always want to go back to the rule book. They always want to say, well, what's the policy say? They always want to interpret things in an absolute way. And there is a certain elegance in that. If you're going to do brain surgery, I suppose you want to be pretty precise. So don't get me wrong here. But a lot of things in life aren't brain surgery. And if you're going to make progress and be able to come close to perfection, if you're able to do good, you're going to have to kind of round up to the nearest whole number. You just have to figure out how to get what you're shooting for into the ballpark. And that usually means making some compromises. So if you aren't able to bend the rules, you're not going to be able to succeed in a practical environment. But if you can't stay true to the spirit of the law while you're bending rules, then you're not going to have a result which is satisfactory or meaningful. So finding a middle ground there can be a challenge, but I think it's really important. You want to be as accurate as possible, but you also want to be able to just kind of say, all right, well, we got pretty close. It's good enough. And then move on. So, that can be kind of a hard balance to walk. But I think in workplace situations, I see it a lot. There's people who are really detail-oriented, and then there's people who are not detail-oriented at all, and both of them wind up failing. And then the people who are more successful tend to be the ones that they generalize. They cut through all of the noise of fine details, and they get right to the meat of what the bottom line is. And it's really elegant and meaningful when you encounter direct communication that you can understand. Which leads me to less is more. If you have a really detailed, high-level scientific paper that's telling you about something, is that going to be what you go to as a resource? Maybe. But you're much more likely to just look for something that tells you, overall, here's what's best. Here's 5 bullet points that say what's good, what's bad. People want the 2-paragraph option instead of the entire encyclopedia. So being able to fit a lot of detail into a short summary is often more important than being able to have a lot of detail and precision in what you publish. Doesn't mean that there's not a place for these things, but I'm just saying most of life is pretty much just normal people trying to make normal decisions. And if you are a person who can't generalize, then you're going to struggle to succeed. So you don't want to be a person who's looking for perfection everywhere, because then you're going to have this attitude, well, it's either perfect or it's bad. And then if that's how you see the world, then that pretty much just means everything's going to be bad, because you're never going to get to a point where everything's perfect. And I guess, that leads me to another thing, and that is, can you trust your gut feeling on something? And I think we always look for a way to, I guess, create a system that gives us rules to determine whether something's right or not. But intuition is not so much about falling on a rule book to tell you what's right. It's more, you just kind of trust yourself. And if it doesn't feel right, then you trust it probably isn't right. And if you feel like it's good, then you trust that. And somebody might come and say, well, why do you feel that way? And you don't necessarily even know on a intellectual level. You just know because that's what it feels like is right. And trusting your intuition can be just as important as being analytical about things. That's something you can't really teach. But I do think it goes back to being honest with yourself. We have a sense of knowing what we think is right and wrong, and then we think we have to try to prove it. And sometimes you don't really have to prove it. Sometimes you can just accept that something seems off, therefore you're going to just go ahead and say it's off, it's not right. And somebody might ask you to prove it, and you can't give them absolute proof, but that doesn't mean you don't stick to your guns. I remember a Star Trek episode. Actually, it was the movie, The Voyage Home, I believe. But Captain Kirk wanted Spock to make a calculation to get them where they needed to go on this spaceship. And Spock was struggling because Spock wants to be really precise. He wants to use logic to find the absolutely correct solution to the problem. But they didn't have the time or the resources to do this, so Spock had to guess. But Dr. McCoy told him, the truth is, your guess is probably better than anybody else's certainty, because Spock had good judgment. Maybe Spock didn't feel like he had good judgment. He didn't feel comfortable just making a decision. But him just making a reasonable guess was more accurate probably than a human doing actual calculations, because he had the level of experience and skill to make a good, educated guess. Sometimes in life, we tend to doubt ourselves, especially when other people call us into question. But it's also important to trust our rational guesses. It's not that we make things up completely out of thin air. It's just you trust your senses are not betraying you. It's like if you're a manager and somebody seems like they are lazy and they're doing shady things and they're underperforming. Maybe you don't have some sort of rock solid evidence of that underperformance. It's just a lot of little things that all add up to the obvious. Maybe you would think to yourself, well, I want to be fair, so I can't call this person out for what they're doing because I've got to be 100% sure that I'm in the right. Well, maybe. But what happens when you wait all this time and you're trying to, make it a scientific study and you're researching things and you're documenting things and you're turning it into a big old case study? Well, this person, meanwhile, is just doing all kinds of mischief. Are you really doing yourself a favor? Or would you be better off if you just called that person out straight up front and said, hey man, what are you doing? Because it's obvious that you ain't doing your job. But see, we don't want to have that open confrontation. We don't want to put ourselves on the line and risk being unreasonable or being wrong. So we hesitate. We sit on our laurels and we wait for that perfect moment when all of the stars will align. All the stars aren't going to align. You just have to move on things. You got to trust that in a world full of things that are different varying shades of gray, you've got to make your own interpretation and you've got to trust that you're not too far off, and then you move on it and you do the best you can and you don't worry too much. Sometimes you may miss your mark, but you'll probably find more often than not, if you begin and you generalize to some degree enough to where you're not stuck in decision paralysis, you're going to make reasonable choices. The best way to kill progress is to get people to feel like they can't make any choices unless they're perfect. Then everything just stays in the development phase. You never release. You never progress. You're just working on it. A good example of this would probably be that space game called Star Citizen. It looks like a really beautiful space game. And yet it's been in early access, pre-release, some kind of alpha for like a decade. And people are playing this half-baked game year after year, just hoping that one day it's gonna get to the point where it can actually get an official release. And it's turned into some kind of a joke. Like maybe one day it'll be fully released and it'll be successful. But as it is, it seems more like a scam, because there's never going to be a time when Star Citizen actually gets properly released. So, in that case, what would be better? To release something that's maybe not perfect, but it's well-rounded, and it's complete, and it's a finished product. Or to have something which looks like it has out of this world potential, but it's never really going to be finished. Trust your judgment. Don't be afraid to generalize enough so that you can have a reasonable level of efficiency in your life. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't care about the details, but at the same time, you have to move forward. You have to be doing something every day to make your life better. You have to figure out how to get past that feeling of, I'm not good enough, I don't know enough, I'm not proficient enough. And you've got to just begin. You've got to start. You've got to accept the fact that you are good enough right now to do something with your life. And when you don't have doubt, it's amazing how you start to get better at things. Because nobody wants to trust somebody who is uncertain of themselves. So if you really just kind of have this feeling of, well, I'm not ready for this, I can't do this, but I guess I have to, so hopefully I don't screw it up too bad. Well, that just works against you. But if you're honest about what you know, honest about what you don't know, then you're not afraid to call people's bluff. You're not afraid to lay it out the way it is. Sometimes you just say, you know what? I don't know everything. There's a lot I don't know, but there are a few things that I'm pretty darn sure of. So we're not going to throw that away because there's a few things I don't know 100%. I might be new, but I wasn't born yesterday, right? So trust yourself. Don't be afraid to act today, because we don't have time to waste. Perhaps we have time to be patient, but we don't have time to do nothing. As always, on your adventure, best of luck wherever you find yourself. Till next time, thank you.